Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Apologies for the slight delay, but we are ready to get started. I'll reiterate as people kind of continue to filter in from our lobby, but first, thank you all so much for joining us today. Everyone's been muted upon entry, but we do want to make sure that the session is interactive. So we welcome you all to use the chat to let us know where you're joining from and maybe what nonprofit you're representing. We'd also love to see you. So encourage folks to join us on camera so we can ensure we're having a super interactive session today. And again, just thank you so much for joining. My name is Olivia Ross. I'm a community engagement partner here at Citizens, and I'm thrilled to have everyone here today so we can kind of deep dive on an important topic around strategic planning. This session is brought to you all in partnership with Nutter, a Boston-based law firm that we will hear more about in just a bit. But again, some quick housekeeping items before we really dive in. We are recording and transcribing the session. So the replay will be available via a YouTube link for anybody who was unable to join us today, or if you'd like to kind of look back for reference. That recording will be circulated along with a post-event survey after the call. Let us know in the chat where you are joining from, what nonprofit you represent maybe. And again, we would love to have an interactive session today, so feel free to join us on camera and use the chat throughout the hour. So as I mentioned, today we are here to talk about strategic planning, structural options, and best practices for greatest impact. So we'll hear from a few folks at Nutter, but the session is going to be led by Melissa McMorrow, who is chair of Nutter's tax department and co-chair of the firm's nonprofit and social impact practice group. We are also joined by Erin Giacchetti, Matt Doring, and Paul Ayu, all from Nutter, who will give introductions of themselves in just a bit. As I mentioned, we're really striving for interaction today, so would love to see the chat being used throughout. Ask your questions. We'll also leave some time at the end for Q&A as well. Before we dive in, though, just wanted to start by kind of sharing Citizens' community mission. We like to be grounded in our purpose and sort of why we're here today. So between our colleagues and our customers, Citizens has a presence in all 50 states. We understand that each of these places face their own unique challenges and that those challenges require bold and innovative solutions. And that's why we're committed to leveraging our resources to equip organizations with the tools that they need to help the communities where we live and work thrive. And sort of similarly, that is why we have started Citizens Helps You. That's our virtual conversation series that convenes our network of nonprofit partners from across the country. And I think even recently, maybe other countries as well, which is really exciting to connect with one another and with valuable tools and resources. We host one session a month, always virtually via Teams, with the goal of providing those expert insights and tangible takeaways to help all of our partners navigate current challenges effectively and make the most of our partnership. We're constantly adding new topics since, like I've said, and since if you've joined before, you've heard me say we like to make sure these sessions are timely and relevant. To that point, we will be seeking some feedback at the end of this session for future sessions, so stay tuned. But back to today's session, though, I'm going to turn it over to Melissa to introduce herself and the rest of the team and to dive into today's topic. So, Melissa.
Sure. Hi, thank you so much to everyone at Citizens. My name is Melissa McMorrow, as Olivia said already, and I am thrilled to be able to do what I do, which is really to help, at its core, to help nonprofit organizations and their affiliates further and advance their charitable missions. And there's lots of balls in the air when you're doing that. And our goal here at Nutter is to make that process as smooth as it can be for you. And just before we dive into today's topic, I want to introduce some key members of our team here at Nutter, as well as just tell you a little bit about Nutter before we get started. So if you want to just go to the first slide. Okay. We are here at Nutter. We're founded in Boston, but we are a national firm with a national practice with offices currently in Boston, New York, San Francisco Bay Area, as well as Hawaii. And lucky Erin will be in our Hawaii office soon, in a couple weeks, so good for her. But I want to turn it over to Paul who is the chair of our firm here at Nutter, here with us from the team are members of our tax and corporate structuring group, as well as our nonprofit lending practice. But really, our representation of nonprofits spans the entire spectrum of the services that we provide. But Paul, if you could just give a brief introduction on your end, and then we can turn to Matt and then Aaron.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you all for allowing us this time to be with you. And we look forward to the conversation. So my name is Paul Yube. I'm chair of the firm. One of my focus areas is commercial real estate and development, but the other is profit and nonprofit governance. And just to give you a sense of the organizations in which I've been involved, they've been from the very largest to some of the smallest. So I've been on the board of St. Jude Children's Research Hospital for over 35 years and chaired or vice chaired its board or its fundraising board for 10 of the last 15 years. St. Jude is the largest healthcare nonprofit in the United States of America. But I also formed something called Small Business Strong with 10 business leaders here in the greater Boston area during COVID to help companies that had $250,000 or less in gross revenue to provide free business and legal and marketing services during the height of COVID to help them. I've been a trustee of private educational institutions and also some government and quasi-government institutions. So a broad range of big, small, different industries. And so happy to be here and provide some color commentary as we go along. And I say that because I see all the different kinds of organizations being represented here. Look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Matt, thank you, Paul, very much.
Yeah, first of all, good morning to everybody. And again, thanks to reiterate what Paul and Melissa, thank you for inviting us to share some time with you. Very briefly, my practice is hyper-focused on structuring financing arrangements, which includes, for purpose of this call, public finance matters. And very pleased to serve as outside counsel to citizens on a number of those matters, as well as to a number of institutions that are looking to get into that world. And some of my favorite conversations are with people who have not been part of that before. The public finance practice is a different animal, which involves a lot of discussions and understanding as to how it works. And always pleased to be part of those conversations. And looking forward to our broader conversation today.
And hello, everybody. My name is Erin Cicchetti. I am a partner in Nutter's tax department and also a member, along with Melissa, of our nonprofit and social impact practice group, as well as Paulina as well. So although I also work on for-profit and individual tax matters, a large part of my practice is working with charitable organizations and other tax-exempt organizations on a wide variety of matters, starting with formation, governance, ongoing compliance matters, and including working on a wide variety of different merger and affiliation transactions. So happy to be here.
Okay. Olivia, I'll just, if you want to advance the slide, we can get going into the meat. And just one before we leave our introductory comments, we do take ourselves very seriously and our work very seriously. And we're just pleased that all the hard work that we put in for clients like yourselves is recognized in various different places. But on to the agenda. Okay, so just as a general matter, today's topic is about strategic alternatives, options for strategic affiliations and whatever legal form they may take. And we wanted to take the time today to kind of set the stage, acknowledge the world that we're living in, acknowledge why you may want to consider some of these alternatives. What are the alternatives? How do you navigate them? And then what are the benefits at the end of the day after you go through all of these situations? And so we'll take those situations one by one and, start with some of the challenges that you may be experiencing and probably understand better and and more acutely than we do. So if we go to the next slide. Um, you know, the world today, the world has always been challenging. I think in the nonprofit sector right now, there's an additional layer of challenges above and beyond what you would normally be navigating, and I want to acknowledge that. But you know, some of the typical challenges that we see when clients come to us considering strategic alternatives um, are 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 the issues that I have here before you on the slide. The rapid change in technology, the rapid change in the way nonprofits do business, and yes, nonprofit organizations are businesses. The need to have scale in this environment, whether it be for overhead costs or for access for your footprint or any of them, a number of reasons as to why you might need to be larger or have more scale to be able to effectively advance your mission. The challenges that we face with acquiring and retaining quality talent that are able to execute on your mission. As I alluded to before, just the rapid change in the organizations that regulate nonprofits and the sources of funding that could traditionally be relied on, but may or may not be able to be relied upon now. The rapid increase in competition, both from other nonprofits as well as from for-profits. Um, the increasingly acute need for succession planning, as well as the change in mix of needs of the populations that you serve. All of those are reasons that we hear that our clients come to us and say, what we're doing right now isn't working. We need to do a better way. And we do partner with your organization, with nonprofit organizations in helping to optimize the best way to solve these problems. And just to put a finer point on the legal issues, I started working with, I was trying to advising nonprofits from a legal perspective in 2000. And since then, in the past 25 years, the oversight, whether it be from state agencies, federal agencies, tax, other regulatory, it's only increased and in my view continues to increase. And I don't see that trend going away anytime soon. Paul alluded to governance matters. You know, Governance matters have always been important to nonprofit organizations. Going way back to 2008, the IRS put a very, very particular fine focus on governance organizations, and they were followed by uh, attorney general's offices around the country ramping up their efforts in there, all based upon the premise that a well-run organization, a well-governed organization, is less likely to run afoul of the rules and regulations and is less likely to get itself in trouble. And the other area that we see an increasing amount of scrutiny on is in the executive compensation area, again, both at the IRS and the state level. And that also ties back into governance in its importance. So again, just setting the stage for why you might want to consider some strategic options for enhancing your delivery system and your organization. So the main topic of this session is consolidation, strategic options, mergers, affiliation, and what do we mean by that? And there's a whole spectrum of ways that you can combine with other organizations. Sometimes, most of the time, nonprofit, but some of the times for profit. And sometimes the list of options can be overwhelming. We're going to try to break it down in this conversation And, merger, it's a pretty straightforward description, which I will get into. Affiliation is a little bit more less less defined, and we'll go into some of the more key ways that nonprofits tend to engage in affiliations. But I do want to just speak to a couple of them that I'm not going to focus intently on, but I want to make sure we understand are there. Contractual arrangements, those can be simple contractual arrangements, can be affiliations. And the most common contractual, you have your everyday contracts, but sometimes you get into situations where you may not want to be fully affiliated or fully merged with an organization, but you may have some needs for their resources of another organization, or you may have an extra capacity of resources that you have the ability to share with other nonprofit organizations. And, in those situations, a simple contract will do. There are certain things you need to consider, but the arrangement is pretty straightforward. You keep your independence, and you keep your staff for the most part, and you keep going along on your day-to-day basis. A little bit more involved would be something that people are calling something that people might call a joint venture. That's when two fully seagoing organizations come together and form another entity, which is generally a partnership. And and the nonprofit will operate their own organizations, and they will together operate a separate entity. um, that those are significant endeavors that require a lot of overhead, a lot of attention from leadership, and to successfully combine and run an organization with another organization. Um, you see those most commonly in the healthcare space, although you'll see them, of course, elsewhere in other nonprofit sectors. But they take a lot. They are very high touch relationships, and they may be right for your organization, but there are other options that I want to go over that I would suggest considering before going full force into a joint venture. So moving on to the next slide. When you consider a merger, I just want to put it in kind of a pictorial form, right? Your organization A, another organization is organization B. What a merger means is that those two legal entities, those two corporations come together and they form, and one goes away. In this schematic, organization B goes away. And organization A remains. We say survives, stays alive, so to speak. And you've now combined your two organizations into one, and that combined organization lives on and continues to operate through organization A. Why do some people do them? What are the benefits? In many cases, two combined entities operating as one helps you save costs. You only have one organization to operate going forward. So one brand, one, to manage, things like that. And from a regulatory standpoint, there's approvals that you need to go through, but of all the options we're considering, it's a relatively efficient process for integrating. To speak a little bit to the corporate side of things, unless there are special provisions in your documents, all of the assets and liabilities from, in this case, organization B, transfer over to organization A. There, of course, has to be diligence that's done before that happens. But from a legal perspective, you come out of it with one organization owning all of the assets and liabilities of both organizations. just a little pause for a commercial, and Matt, you maybe will nod your head. A big thing to remember in a merger context is there are certain third parties that you have to get consent from before you go ahead and do this. And one of the big ones is your lender. So just pause for commercial there. And it helps to have a good relationship with your lender and with your banking relationships to make sure that that piece of it goes smoothly.
Yeah, Melissa, I don't know if there's enough room in this box for me to nod as enthusiastically as I can to that comment. I mean, every credit agreement or credit document is going to have probably, if not an outright assignment on any merger or change in the legal organization of the entity. It's certainly going to have some notice and consent rights built in, and they're usually a bit of a lead time item as well. So the earlier that you involve your lender in the process, the smoother it's going to be.
Thank you very much. Okay, and so why would you maybe not want to do a merger? I think it's important to understand, if particularly if your organization B, that you're going away as you once were, as you once operated. That means 2 boards get combined into 1. It means that, I mean, you can maintain separate brands if you want to. And there's a question in the chat about a DBA. I've definitely been involved in mergers where the legal organization that's going away may have a stronger brand than the one that's surviving. And there are ways to maintain those, the other brands through things like DBAs. But over time, I think generally speaking, you're going to gain your efficiencies by having a more streamlined brand and messaging. But there are ways for some of the for other brands to survive. There's a lot of diligence. Matt speaks to the diligence and the procedures and the approvals required on the lending front. You also have to do the same with your benefit plans. You also have to do the same with any lease arrangements that you have. And those are the big ones. But it takes time and diligence and effort on the part of your leadership and rank and file people that are already stretched. One estimate of a CEO that I worked with on the amount of additional time it takes to go through a merger was that, take your existing workload, and for the people who are fully engaged, which often tends to be your leadership and your finance people and your HR people, add 30 to 35% of your workload to that during the time period where you're considering the merger. So you have to be prepared. And you also, to the last point on limitations, you also have to be prepared to lose autonomy. You're going, to Paul's governance point, you're going from 2 boards to 1. You have to figure out a strategic plan for how to maintain the effectiveness of the board and how to combine those boards, and spend significant time on integrating those boards and all of the governance committees that operate underneath it. But even with all those hurdles and complexities, sometimes it is the best answer. Okay.
Melissa, can I just add something, and maybe we could get some discussion on this. I think this is such an important point because for a lot of nonprofits, one of the biggest challenges is resources, meaning financial. And, with every threat comes an opportunity. And so I think it's almost a fiduciary duty in some cases to determine, should we or should we not, if there are challenges, not every organization at every time. And as I will just say this, as threatening as it may feel to some, if you find yourself in a vulnerable position, or quite frankly, in your heart, knowing that you're not fulfilling your mission with the robustness that you get up every morning wanting to, it's something to think about and examine your own thoughts about it and your board's thoughts about it. You may conclude, no, we're good where we are, but it's healthy to challenge, are you fulfilling your mission fully? And is there an option? For example, I chaired the board of the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce, and there have been 2 different organizations we've brought in. Those organizations now are a part of us. They have not necessarily lost their identity, but they've gained a larger platform, and we've made them programs. Small Business Strong was one. It's now a program of the chamber of our foundation. And there was another one that was more focused on a segment of the economy. And it helped them stand up to be much larger and amplified the chamber mission as well. So I just wanted to add that color commentary.
Agreed. Yeah, thank you, Paul. And it's funny, in the for-profit context, sometimes mergers in some ways are more straightforward, because the question is what's the price? What's the share price? What's the purchase price? What's the, what are the assets valued at? In nonprofits, often, not all, sometimes there is, but often there is no purchase price. It's just an agreement to combine. And so then, the main focus tends to be, what will the governance structure look like, and who will be in charge at the end of the day. And sometimes those are hard decisions to be made, but sometimes that is, to Paul's point, that requires a lot of soul searching and an analysis of whether, even though you would lose some autonomy, is it the best thing for the organization going forward and for the effectiveness of the programming to merge. I see a question in the chat. How do you decide who survives? How do you decide who doesn't survive? That's an interesting analysis. But I don't know, Erin, if you want to speak to that a little bit about, sometimes it's really just practical. Which organization, which organization dissolving would create the least amount of heavy lifting to go forward?
No, I think that's exactly right. It certainly can be, just that the largest organization, maybe by assets, survives. But in the case where the small organization going away would require a lot of legal consents, either with lenders, or there would be a lot of employee benefit issues. We've certainly seen situations where the smaller entity survives, and then perhaps there's just some branding decisions to be made, if the larger organization, doesn't want to lose its brand, its reputation. So yeah, it's a multi-factor analysis, and we've seen it all.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So the next slide. Okay, back on the topic of affiliation, if your board is not yet ready to be completely integrated with another organization, or if there's some, funding source reason why the merger is not attractive, or if there's, we already talked about brands, if there's some reason to maintain an entity because of a brand presence, or because some state law consideration requires you to have a presence as a legal entity in a certain location. There are alternatives that get you quite close to a merger, but retain some of the independence that your funding sources or regulators may require that you have. And so just keeping in line with a 2-organization example, there can be more than 2 organizations involved. What we call a sole member affiliation model is a situation where almost, in this example that we're giving you, it looks like a parent subsidiary relationship. So organization A and B start out as separate and independent organizations, but then they decide to come together. And the way it looks from a legal standpoint is that organization A becomes the parent of organization B. And as most of you know, nonprofits don't have shareholders. And so in the for-profit context, this would be the parent becoming the sole shareholder of organization B. But in the nonprofit context, generally the way we make that happen is we make organization A be what we call the sole member of organization B. And while it doesn't mean that organization A owns organization B, what it does mean for the most part is that organization A controls organization B. So a couple of distinctions from the merger. These two organizations stay in place. They still have their own governing documents, meaning their charters or their certificates of organization, and they both have their own sets of bylaws, but those documents are changed to reflect the fact that, for the most part, Organization A controls Organization B, in the way that a shareholder would have a control interest in an organization. So in most situations, Organization A decides who sits on the governing body of the board of directors of Organization B. Organization A typically would approve the budget of Organization B, and draft the governing policies of that Organization B. But they would have separate operations. They do have separate budgets, things like that. But most often, if you're going to do this, you're going to work together in a coordinated fashion. You're probably going to be sharing employees, certainly executive staff you're probably going to be sharing, and you're going to be working in a way that aligns both enterprises. So I've gone through most of the benefits, but just to review, it's a little bit easier to preserve your brand. You're certainly preserving your board. There's a significant degree of autonomy that is retained, although all of that is negotiable. This can happen faster than other arrangements than particularly a merger because there aren't as many assets and liabilities being transferred from one organization to another, and but you do still have the ability to work in coordinated fashion. On the limitations, for the acquiring organization, which I'll call it Organization A, there's more overhead, there's more work. You still have to maintain all your separate filings, all your separate regulatory filings, your tax filings. You're probably going to have a consolidated audit. So that's a little bit of a savings there, but you do still have two separate organizations with separate bank accounts and separate filing requirements. Organization B, of course, loses a fair amount of control, and that needs to be completely understood before people go forward with this option. And then again, there's you still have a fair amount of overhead as opposed to if you were to merge into one organization.
And Melissa, there's a question in the chat. Is it preferred to maintain Org A name or create a DBA? And can I address that, or did you want to address
Sure.
that? Yeah.
Sure.
The answer is it really depends, and brand quality and power is really in the nonprofit sector is critical, and so it would probably be that you would maintain A, but you might also use it as an opportunity. You have to honestly assess when you're merging who has the stronger financials and corporate structure, but who has the stronger brand. And maybe the opportunity is to do a DBA and to do something that incorporates the power of the both. So it's a great question. And I think the lesson from the question is don't make an assumption it's one or the other. Do it as in the best interest of the mission. And that should come from some surveying and some, data, not just gut instinct. I think too many people rely on gut, but you can do some surveying and, see who has the more positive and negatives in the community or where you're trying to reach out to. But it's part of a strategic analysis that should be very much a part of what you think about, just as much as the financial.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. And if we go to the next slide, we're going to transition into just that. So how do you get ready? How do you know when you're ready? And how do you make the decision as to which route to go? And Paul teased that very well in saying, you need to be thoughtful about it. Need to go out and do your research, do your homework. Don't just say, yeah, I think this might be a good idea. Um, be prepared, get a team put together, understand where you want to go. What are the what are the problems that you're trying to solve? Paul mentioned earlier turning a crisis into an opportunity. Often organizations are considering strategic alternatives or combinations when they have significant financial challenges. And sometimes those are very, very hard conversations to be having. Sometimes you have to let go of certain programming and certain lines of business to make it work. And sometimes those can be stumbling blocks. But this is all part of the assessment that you need to be making. And then finally, who would be what organization would be a good partner? Is there out there? Because so much of the success of combinations in whatever form they materialize into is the relative strength of the match of the two organizations. And again, to Paul's point, this is not something that should be done by gut. It should be done by thorough deliberative planning. And so just a little bit more on that process. So much of this is, if you go to the next slide. So really just making sure you do your diligence, but then also making sure that part of that diligence is meaningful, high level conversations with both the the chief executive of the organization combined with at least the board chair, if not a committee of the board, and having really direct, clear conversations on where you want to take things and why you're doing the combination you're considering and what the terms of it will be, and really laying out what the relationship and the arrangement looks like once you've done your diligence and once you've come to an agreement. I think there's a question about the slides, and I think are they going to be shared after?
Yes, yeah, we can share the slides along with the recording. I think I might have skipped ahead one slide too early, which may be the slide being referenced, but I think you're going to get there about the strategic planning specifically.
Yeah. And if you go to the slide that says succession planning, we've touched upon a fair amount of this, but I just wanted to speak a little bit on situations I've touched upon them, but just name the situations where we see people most commonly moving forward or considering strategic alternatives. It's in succession planning, finding uh, effective top talent at the C-suite level. We're seeing a significant amount of retirements, and we're seeing the for-profit world, being more competitive on salaries, and we see particularly retirements of top leaders driving mergers in addition to some of the regulatory changes that we've talked about. We've already talked about financial emergencies. We see that happening in different spaces, some more than others. And we also see board succession, like lack of the ability to recruit strong and talented and engaged board members as a reason why an organization might consider partnering or affiliating or merging with another nonprofit. And we also see situations where a board is having significant challenges dealing with founder syndrome. An organization founded by one or two or a small group of individuals who have done a fantastic job with the organization, but are now getting to a point where they need to start thinking about succession, and they don't, and they can't, and they won't. And sometimes for a governing body, a merger is really one of the key ways for them to allow an organization to continue on and continue carrying out its mission while dealing with a really challenging founder.
And Melissa, it looks like we do have a question in the chat as it relates to mergers. Paul's asking, in the case of a merger, would you determine ahead of time which organization will be the surviving organization before those discussions start, or is that something that kind of shakes out as the process goes along?
I think that it both. Sometimes it's very clear. Sometimes it's very clear. There's one organization that's so much larger than the other that it's really not a question. But when you've got two similarly sized organizations, you kind of agree tentatively that this is your arrangement, and then you will decide the exact legal structure once you've done some more diligence on what all is involved. And Erin, I don't know if you want to speak a little bit to the kind of the legal process from LOI and into agreements and what that looks like.
Yeah. So once you've identified, excuse me, a potential affiliation partner, one of the first things that we see and we recommend is to negotiate and enter into an LOI. So an LOI is generally a non-binding agreement that sets forth the parties' intentions with respect to the negotiating process. Some of the provisions in the LOI, like confidentiality or public statements, are often binding, but for the most part, it's a non-binding agreement and really an outline of what both parties see as the next steps. Then you move into the more in-depth diligence process. This is important no matter what affiliation you're exploring, but it's especially important in the merger context where the entity that is going away, all of the assets and liabilities of the entity will become the assets and liabilities of the surviving entity. And again, Melissa's talked about this a fair amount, but big categories of diligence are, dealing with lenders, any leases, and again, can't stress enough how long the employee benefit transition matters can take. So we always recommend that you get on those as soon as possible. And usually in a parallel track with doing all the diligence, the legal team will begin drafting any of the necessary legal documents. So in a merger, it's a merger agreement and articles of merger, which will be filed with the state of the surviving entity. And if there's two different states, it might be a little bit more complex. And then in the other affiliation models, it might just be a contractual agreement. One thing to note in the sole member model is it's really important to make sure the parties are negotiating the bylaws of the entity, the subsidiary entity, to define exactly what the members' rights and responsibilities will be, and what powers the member will have. That's a big negotiating point. And once the diligence and the drafting negotiating process is done, it's a matter of executing the documents and making all requisite filings with all the state agencies and federal agencies.
Thank you. So in order to leave some time for questioning, I just want to go to our to next two slides and wrap things up. So we've spoken a little bit about who gets involved. This is what we consider to be the deal team. Of course, your executives, your board members, your legal team, your accountants, and to the extent you have the financial resources, there are some really strong nonprofit consultants out there who have been through this before and can really help facilitate the process, particularly if you're having resource constraints with your existing staff to make this happen. And then lastly, I just want to end on a governance point about the involvement of the board in this situation. Ultimately, these decisions are decisions of the board. They need to have enough, they need to be educated, they need to be involved, in the strategic level of planning. You need to have a good working relationship. You have to have a board that can function and handle dissent and disagreement and significant debate on situations like these, because these are major transactions for your organizations, and sometimes a board that's not well oiled and doesn't function well together can be a significant obstacle to really doing what's best for the mission. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions that people may have. And I know that the rest of the panel is here as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Melissa. As I will just reiterate that key point, we would love to, if anybody has any other questions, to feel free to enter them into the chat for Melissa or Matthew, Paul, or Erin. We have about 10 minutes set aside, so whatever's on your mind, feel free to put it in the chat. While we wait to see what rolls in, though, I am going to launch that poll that I mentioned at the top. And I'll just reiterate again, like I said, our goal is always to make these sessions timely and relevant. And one topic that we hear a lot about just in general is around generative AI. There's so much information out there. There's a lot to make sense of. And at Citizens, we do have some subject matter experts who can share their insights to help everyone navigate that just a little bit with a little bit more confidence. So on a future session, we would love to explore that topic, but we really want to make sure that it's tailored to exactly what you as our nonprofit partners need. So I'm going to launch a poll that asks just a simple question. In terms of generative AI and sort of what you know about it, we're curious if it would be more useful to hear how to implement AI into your day-to-day functions, or if you have a specific business function use case that you think AI would be able to help. If it's both, that's great. But if it's one or the other, you kind of feel strongly, feel free to indicate that in the poll that should have hopefully popped up for our attendees. That will sort of inform how the presentation shakes out for our next session, which we've kind of found is a great model. That's actually how we arrived at the topic for today's session, was polling our audience on the prior one. So please do let us know your thoughts via that poll. Your feedback is super important in making sure that these sessions are really useful for you. And while people vote, I will just see if there's anything else in the chat. We've got a few more minutes.
I'd like to just add one thought while we're waiting for
Please.
questions, if that's
Yes.
okay. In terms of merger, the biggest obstacle, I think, is the fear of the other side of it. And I just want to sort of call that out. First of all, in the world of nonprofits, the fiduciary duty is not, is to do what is best for the mission. And it is really hard. It's hard sometimes to really isolate that versus all of the other issues. I mean, there are people issues, the community issues, the desire to, if you're a founder or an early participant in an organization, to the idea of not keeping it just what it is. There's nothing wrong with merging or being acquired. If it fulfills the mission, it's your duty to do it. is what I would say. In fact, it's your fiduciary duty because your duty is to the public and to the people that you're serving. And I think whether you're the largest or the smallest, that's the guiding light on every decision that should be made in the management and in the boardroom, no, regardless of what the decision is. But on something like this, it helps distill or pull away the noise. And so if you're just thinking, okay, what is best? What is our mission? Why did we start this? Why did I come here? So we've talked about a lot of legal things, but at the end of the day, what's right? And everyone on this call, because you're involved in this industry, big or small, whatever the industry, that's why you're doing this. And go back to your North Star and find it and say, are we doing the best? And is there a way we could do better? You do it anyway every day, right? Your weekly business reviews and strategic plans. This should just be part of it. And I'd suggest that because I think it neutralizes some of the emotional charge that might otherwise come with this.
Yeah, very well said. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, I don't see any additional questions in the chat. So just Erin, Melissa, Matthew, if you have anything else to add, please feel free before we close out for the hour.
Can you read? There's one that just popped up.
Yes. So it looks like going back to the unforeseen, unknown, unexpected, say the 30% increase in workload in such a merger example. What other real world examples might be shared about the rough waters that might flow in beyond the human element? Ownership that leads to frustrations, challenges for staff and board, etc. Sort of what other unexpected things might pop up?
Oh, well, I don't know if they're uh, couple things come to mind. Depending on your funding sources again, right? That some funders may not be happy with the result, right? You may have some donors that say, well, I wanted to give to that organization, but I don't know what this organization is, and I wasn't consulted, and I wasn't brought along. And sometimes you see funders drop off, and I'm not sure if that's an unknown or an unforeseen, but that's certainly something that can be anticipated. That might be a situation. And one of the things that should be on the radar is outreach. Really, that we didn't really talk about too much, but outreach to your stakeholders. And your stakeholders are varied. And one of those stakeholders is, of course, your donors, whether they be foundations or individual philanthropists or whatnot, and finding a role and finding a way that their giving can still be meaningful and effective. So I see that a lot. The other thing I see is, not enough work put on, not enough work done up front to make sure that the integration goes smoothly. There's always going to be hiccups with the integration, but having um, clear plans for what the organization looks like post combination, and who's going to run it, and who's going to run which pieces, and how that is going to play out. And so, a lot of that goes back to the 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 outline of the arrangement that you come to, and don't sometimes you see organizations kick the can and not tackle the hard issues up front and leave them for post integration, and that doesn't always bode well for success after. So I will say that.
One last question before we go around board membership. Paul asks, to what extent should you bring over board members from the organization that doesn't survive? And is there a case where they would make up the majority of the new board? If not, how do you keep the old board involved post-merger?
You can negotiate anything you want, right? You can negotiate a certain number of board seats for the organization going away. I've seen some organizations take everyone, and then people will cycle off in different, in different segments. But usually there's some acknowledgement that some board members will cycle off. But really that's something that's completely and totally up to agreement between the two parties. I don't know if anyone else wants to weigh in.
I think just the only other thing we've seen is to the extent the entity that's going away doesn't have a large number of board members joining the surviving entities board, you could put together a non-voting advisory committee to ease the process post-closing. So we've seen that as well. Just another way to kind of integrate more people and get more people involved and make sure that both missions and both organizations are represented post-merger.
Yeah, and just one other thing, for a little bit more complicated situations, sometimes you see situations where you require the consent, the consent of the old board members, so to speak, the legacy board members from the old organization, in order to do something different with the assets or the business or the programs of the organization that went away. And that can be effective, but I do want to caution that when you set up approval rights or board seats specifically for an organization that's being merged out of existence, I would always time limit that, because in the moment it feels like that, there's going to be people forever that are, going to be putting the interests of the old organization forward. But over time, you run out of people who were affiliated with that organization that went away. And so you do want that, if you do end up with an arrangement that they sound great at the time, but it is smart to time limit it.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Melissa. And thanks also to Erin and Paul and Matthew for joining us today and for sharing your insights. Of course, thank you to all of our nonprofit representatives that took time out of their day to join us as well. We really appreciate it. As mentioned at the top, you will receive the recording, the materials, and a post-event survey via email after this call, along with invitations to future sessions. So again, thank you for joining today's session. We look forward to seeing you on a future one and continuing on this sort of learning journey together. So with that, we hope everyone has a great rest of the day, and thanks again to our speakers and attendees.
Thank you.